Hi, Sean Meyer here from Municipal World, here at the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities Conference, here in lovely Halifax. Continuing our podcast series with important people such as my next guest. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I am David Mitchell. I'm the mayor of the town of Bridgewater here in Nova Scotia.
Thank you for joining us. We're at a conference full of busy people. The current session is a networking event out in the hallway, so there's a lot of buzz in the air. Clearly, a lot of people are excited to be here, yourself included. What's the value in coming to this?
Oh my gosh, whether it's this conference or other municipal conferences, to me, the biggest value is in that networking.
Sure.
There have been a lot of times where just having that random conversation with someone, we've come up with best practices, or there's been conferences where our takeaway has resulted in an action in our community. So to me, the networking is the biggest value, but also we just went through a presentation on disaster mitigation and adaptation, things like that, learning about grants. And I mean, depending on the topics, there are some for small municipalities like ours where you can take away some really big ideas.
I mean, there's a lot to be gained from, besides like yours, maybe we don't have infinite number of resources. And somebody here is dealing with something that you dealt with, and a conversation you have over coffee leads to a solution that benefits your community.
Absolutely. It wasn't an NSFM conference, but years ago I went to an FCM conference, and I just had a conversation with someone about an off-leash park. Oh, yeah. And then that idea took root in our community, and 6 or 7 years later, we opened an off-leash park. But that came just from a random interaction with a stranger in a similar position halfway across the country.
It is interesting what can be gained from people who actually understand the world that you live in. Well, let's face it, there's a whole big world out there that doesn't have a clue what you do. But the people here all understand the same language, so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah. So we can share our successes and commiserate a little bit on some of our frustrations.
For sure. Speaking of those frustrations, you are the man in charge in your community, so you know the problems that are out there. I don't think you would be the mayor if you didn't enjoy the local government process. But local government is not the safe maybe isn't the right word, but not the easiest place to be these days. What do you see as the state of local government in this country?
I think it starts with a lot of confusion and unknowns from the public. So we are the government closest to the people. We talk about that. We brag about that. That's my favorite thing about municipal government is, going to the grocery store and having those conversations.
And you do have them.
Yes, all the time. But I think the confusion is that we seem to be the catch-all as local government for everything.
Sure.
So I get calls about immigration. It seems to be one of the big topics now. I'll get emails from people. I'm here for work. Will you sign my immigration papers? Well, that's federal. That has nothing to do with this. And we get all these questions where they have nothing to do with municipal government or our role. And so I think that's really changed, certainly over the last 8 years that I've been mayor, is to see more and more of that. And as my CIO likes to say, municipal government, we must stay within our lane. Right. But provincially and federally, they can go in anyone's lane, our lane, each other's lane.
They often do.
Right? So I think the public sees that.
Yeah.
They see, government just kind of meanders wherever it wants to go. And we're here, we're local, so they come to us. So in terms of that, I see that is something that we, as local politicians, we need to always be working on educating the public. The other, in terms of the state of local government that I see a public across the country that is frustrated, struggling, angry, and where it used to be a little bit calmer, more and more local politicians are kind of taking the brunt of
Absolutely
that.
True. You see a lot of your colleagues, mayors across this country, not choosing to run again or leaving before end of term. I'm sure you understand that.
Yep. And it's harder because, again, we're local. Everyone knows where we live. And so it would not be unusual for someone to come to our door, not there for, a happy reason.
Yeah.
And so it can become concerning, especially if, you're alone or that topic is something that's quite sensitive. That person is very angry. It gets scary.
Absolutely. So when it is scaring people who are in the profession, it's also keeping people from wanting to get into it.
Yeah.
And somebody would approach you and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What would you tell them? How would you prepare them for what's ahead?
Yeah, so there's two things I always say to people is, are you running for mayor or you're running for council?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a very big distinction there.
Absolutely.
So as mayor, how I always describe it is mayor is like a goalie. When the team wins the game, the team is amazing. When the team loses, it's the goalie's fault. And so we are the goalie.
Yeah.
And so if you're running for council, you're a little bit more removed from that angry population. They still are, they're still upset and things like that, but their focus is generally at the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually say to people, if you're running for council, you're going to get some angry emails and people are going to be upset. But if you're running for mayor, it's the next level. You have to be prepared for someone to come to your house potentially, someone coming to your office, someone really upset, and it is your fault.
Right.
And so how you talk that through with somebody, that is something that you have to be prepared to do. Absolutely. And I've had people say, well, I'm not really good at that.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe this isn't the role for you.
Sure.
But most people, they're asking that question because they're ready to step up. And
it's a fair point.
But it's just preparing them for, and maybe it'll never happen, but you got to be prepared for it.
You have a community that once upon a time didn't have to deal with homelessness, mental health, all those other problems that once upon a time somebody would have said, oh, that's Halifax.
Yep.
Or Toronto, whatever. Those problems are now on your doorstep. How do you address them? Because we all know you can't do it by yourself.
Right. And some of these things are, again, that's that blurring of those political lines, right? So a lot of that is within the jurisdiction and the purview of the provincial government, right? Department of Community Services, affordable housing, all those things are within the mandate of another order of government, but we can't just put up our hand and go,
that's right.
Not our problem. So a lot of it for us is, the first step is educating the public. Right? So not just, okay, we can't solve this on our own. We have to work with the province, and we're trying to work with the province, and for us, we do. But also asking that there be some empathy, right? Just because you see someone struggling, we can't just ask them to move along and sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
So there's two sides to that. So that's kind of where we are now. We have this issue in our community. We're working on it. We have organizations that are supporting them. And for example, we have a shelter in our community that's new, an overnight shelter. But dealing with people who are like, well, I don't like it. I don't like where it is, or I don't like that I see these people. And it's a lot of work to remind folks that these are Canadians that are struggling. You may be uncomfortable seeing them, but that doesn't, mean that they have to go away.
Right.
We have to help them. So that's kind of where we're at now, especially in small communities where this is new.
Yeah, it often is. Speaking of community, and we've talked a little bit about collaboration, whether it's with members here at the conference or with other levels of government. You guys have been at the forefront of collaboration when it comes to the Michelin cities.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know how many people know about that, so I want you to brag a little bit about both the organization and your role in getting their incubator agreement out there in the
Yeah, so it's kind of one of these things that it's been slow to really announce a lot. I talk about it quite a bit in my community, but we haven't really broadcast that as much as maybe we should across the province of the country. So so this is a group of municipalities from across the globe that have two things in common. One is that there is either a Michelin plant or office or research lab, so there is a Michelin component to it. But also that your community is striving towards sustainable, more sustainable development, more sustainable, like green initiatives, things like that. So the first thing I always say is this has nothing to do with Michelin, ironically. It's just that common ground that we have a Michelin. So this was started by the city of Clermont-Ferrand, which is where Michelin has its head office. And so in 2017, they reached out to all the communities that have a Michelin and said, come to France, let's have a meeting, let's see what we can do together.
Wow.
And Bridgewater was like, absolutely. We want to play in this space. We want to collaborate across the globe. I think we can do something more. We can leverage our Michelin more. So again, while it doesn't have anything to do with Michelin as a corporation, there are benefits to having Michelin in your community.
Clearly.
So we met in 2017. Bridgewater became one of only 3 permanent board members. So it's always the mayor of the city of Clermont-Ferrand, the mayor of the next host conference, and then I am the secretary of the treasurer. Secretary of the treasurer. And then we've had 3 conferences now that we've attended. And Yeah, so like you said, we're now signed on to this corridor of incubators with there's 7 of us. And so it's going to be something that I think really translates into some economic development in our communities, especially smaller communities.
Absolutely.
Where we're going to create a soft landing for startups that may be overseas looking to put down roots in Canada,
Wow.
or some of our local corporations that are like, well, how do I expand into Germany or into France? Well, guess what? Now we've got a partner who's going to help you. So for our community, I like to think that like we're an international size city. We're not limited by our size. And so this was just an opportunity to really think outside the normal sphere of where we should be or would be. It also happens to be a remarkable group of people that we have a lot of fun with collaborating.
It must be exciting to be collaborating with people literally across the globe, because so often smaller communities get that tag that nothing important comes out of little towns.
Right. You're limited by, you think you're limited by your budget, for example, right? Small town, small budgets, kind of maybe you don't have to think too far outside the box because you're just that, everything kind of just goes in its own. It
still may vary.
Right. But to me, that would be boring. But also, I don't think that's what communities want. And especially if you're a smaller community that sees out migration. So we've been fortunate that Bridgewater is the only community in Nova Scotia that has not had a declining year of population since 1985.
Wow.
Even Halifax can't say that.
Yeah.
But we recognize that if you want to attract young people, young families, and stop out migration of young people, you have to have some pretty cool jobs. You have to have some great career possibilities. And so looking overseas or looking outside of your normal routine, what kind of businesses that can we attract that are going to attract those young workers? That's where I want to be. And that's what the International Network of Michelin Cities is doing for us, is allowing us to talk to corporations that may never have looked at a small town in Nova Scotia, where now they're literally lining up to say, well, we want to come here now.
When you're talking to other communities about this, it would seem like, yes, there's that Michelin connection, but you have to be willing to embrace innovation, which, let's face it, local government does all the time.
Yeah.
How well of a fit does it have to be, do you think?
That's a good question. I think every community is different, but every community has that niche, right? So if I think of what Truro has, or I think of Amherst or Yarmouth, there's something that there's a space that they can play in, right? So if I think let's talk about Yarmouth, for example, right? Fishing is huge. The ocean is huge, right? So there's some ocean innovation tech that they could really draw on. And, Mayor Mood would be the first lined up to bring that down there. But I think the first hurdle is having the political will to jump outside that comfort zone and trusting that your public is going to back you. And I guarantee that they will. Who does not want cool, innovative careers in their community?
Absolutely.
But you've got to take that first step.
That's an important message to leave folks with. Innovation takes that first step. So thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for having the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.